Welcome, and thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Lead to Win podcast, a podcast focused on exploring strategies, mindsets, and stories behind successful leadership and personal development. On today's episode, I am honored to welcome Alan Stein Jr. to the show. Alan is an experienced keynote speaker and author. At his core, he's a performance coach with a passion for helping business leaders change behaviors. He spent 15 plus years working with the highest performing basketball players on the planet, including NBA superstars Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and Kobe Bryant. Through his customized programs, he transfers his unique expertise to maximize both individual and organizational performance. Alan is a dynamic storyteller who delivers practical, actionable lessons that can be implemented immediately. He teaches proven principles on how to utilize the same approaches in business that elite athletes use to perform at a world-class level. Excited for this conversation today, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm your host, Bo Bergen. Let's do it. Alan, welcome, and thank you so much for coming on today.
Absolutely my pleasure. It's great to be with you.
So I mentioned a little bit of your resume and your bio, but I kind of want to give my listeners a backstory on you, kind of your background on your journey and what's led you to where you are right now.
Well, let me see if I can sum up almost 50 years rather succinctly. So basketball was my first love, and I fell in love with the game at 5 years old. And here, as I'm knocking on the door of being 50 years old, I'm thankful that basketball is still a major pillar and influence in my life. I spent the first third of my life as a very dedicated basketball player and was fortunate enough to play collegiately at Elon University down in North Carolina. While I was at Elon, I started to develop an equal love for what we now call performance training, strength and conditioning, fitness, nutrition, mindset. So when I graduated Elon in the late 90s, I figured what could be better than combining my original love of basketball with this newfound love of performance training. So I decided to become a basketball performance coach. And I left North Carolina and moved back to the DC area, which is where I'm from, and began working as a basketball performance coach. And I chose to specialize primarily at the middle school and high school age level, because that's where I felt I could have the biggest impact, not only on the court, but off the court as a role model as well. And I was fortunate enough to work at two internationally renowned high school programs here in the DC area that have produced dozens of players currently playing in the NBA. And because of my work at those two schools, Montrose Christian, where Kevin Durant graduated from, and DeMatha Catholic High School, where guys like Markelle Fultz and Victor Oladipo graduated from, that got me some contract work with Nike, Jordan Brand, and USA Basketball. And that opened the door to working a series of events for guys like Kobe Bryant and LeBron James and Steve Nash. So I've had a very interesting journey where I've had a peek behind the curtain of what it takes for someone that's just starting out, that's trying to climb that proverbial mountain, like a 15-year-old Kevin Durant. But I've also had a peek behind the curtain to see what it takes to sustain excellence and high performance, working the LeBron James Skills Academy or the Kobe Bryant Skills Academy. And I was on that path for just under 20 years before I decided to make another distinct pivot in my life and leave the basketball training space to pursue full-time corporate keynote speaking and writing, which is what I do now. And I made that pivot in 2017, and it's hard to believe I'm already going into my 8th year of being on stage and writing on page. But everything that I share with these brands and organizations and teams and businesses is usually within a couple degrees of the lessons and disciplines that I learned through the game of basketball and these elite players and coaches. So I know that was a mouthful, maybe not as succinctly as you'd hoped, but feel free to pull on any of those threads that you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, side note, you look great for 50, man. I wouldn't have guessed that.
I still got 2 more years. I'm 48, but I'm getting there.
So chances are, I would say some of my listeners have read your books, at least one of them. Talk a little bit about your books, and if I'm a leader that hasn't read them, what can I expect from them, and how will I get better from reading them?
Well, what many people find interesting is, I guess by definition, I'm a keynote speaker and an author, but the moniker that most resonates with me is coach. Like, to my bones, I am a coach. And it's funny because I don't really resonate with the moniker of being an author. I look at myself as a coach who had enough to say that I thought it was worthy putting on page. But the reason I say that is ultimately I wrote both of those books because those were the books I needed to read. Those are the books that I was going to unpack lessons and do some research on and tell some stories about the things that I needed to improve in my life. And, I wrote Raise Your Game, the first book, when I made the transition from basketball to speaking. And, I had built up a very successful training career in the basketball space. And now I was entering a new world that I admittedly didn't know a whole lot about. I knew that I had some tried and true leadership and team building principles and approaches and perspectives that folks in business would benefit from. But I was new to the game of professional speaking, and certainly new to the game of authoring a book. So I wanted to figure out how I could raise my own game. And that was really the impetus for the first book. The second book, Sustain Your Game, the follow-up, I wrote that during the throes of the pandemic when, like many people, I was struggling with stress and stagnation and burnout, and thought that writing a book about that would not only be liberating and therapeutic for myself, but I figured if it's something that I'm having trouble with, there's a good chance someone else is struggling with that as well. So it's always interesting from a book standpoint. I write the books that I need to read, but I write them in full service of anyone willing to invest their time and money. These books are not about me. These books are about the lessons that can help anyone improve in these areas. And any leader listening right now, if your team needs to improve, leadership, needs to improve sales, needs to improve, anything on an individual or organizational performance level, then I would hope you'd enjoy Raise Your Game. And then, if you guys want to sustain excellence for long periods of time, it has been my experience that the three things that undermine that is stress, stagnation, and burnout. So then you may enjoy the second book as well.
Yeah, cool. So I'm sure you get asked about it quite a bit, but I want to know a little bit about your time working with the level of players that you used to work with. I'm always curious on some of the commonalities between all those kinds of people. From a preparation standpoint or just a hard work standpoint. What's like one thing that all those guys had in common that kind of set them apart besides being talented and extremely gifted? What's one thing that kind of set them apart?
Well, I'll actually give you three things that I've seen unite high performers in basketball, in business, and everything in between. And before I share those three, the most important part about working with anyone at an elite level is to remember that they are a human being. We often put these folks on pedestals and idolize them from afar, but they are human beings. They have emotions, they have feelings, they have preferences just like all of us. So the first thing you have to do is you have to show them that you care about them as a human being first. You don't care about them because they are so-and-so. You care about them because they're a person who is trying to get better. And with that is you have to build and earn both trust and respect. And I'm a believer that you build and earn trust and respect by being a trustworthy person and by being a respectful person. So, we need to model the behavior that we want to see in others. So the first and foremost is, and this was harder in my younger days, I was in awe of and idolized some of the folks I had a chance to work with and meet. But I had to set that aside and just say, all right, they are human beings. I have a job to do. My goal is to do everything in my power to help them reach a new level of performance, even if that's just a very small incremental gain, and don't be a fanboy. With that baseline, the three things that I've noticed that all high performers from basketball to business share. Number one, they never get bored with the basics. They have a strong respect and appreciation for the fundamentals. And they work relentlessly towards mastery of the fundamentals and the basics during the unseen hours. Number two, they've learned to blend confidence with humility in a masterful way. High performers are incredibly confident because they've earned the right to be confident because they've put in the work and they've gotten in the reps, but they always make sure that they stay humble. And staying humble is what allows them to stay open to feedback. Staying humble is what allows them to stay open to being coached. Being humble is what allows them to remind themselves that no matter how good I get, I can still get better. That I might be getting to a razor's edge of my potential, but I'll never actually reach it. My goal is to remember that I can always stretch and always improve and always get better. Once again, even if that just means 0.5% gain in one area of their life. So they blend confidence with humility. And number three is they all have very distinct goals. They have things that they're pursuing, but they put most of their time and attention into the process. They're very process oriented. They may have the goal of winning an NBA championship, but they focus on what they can do today to inch themselves or their teammates closer. A CEO may have a goal of hitting $100 million in revenue, but they focus on what can I do today to lead my team and lead my people just a little bit closer to that. So they figure out the micro steps and the decisions and the habits and the behaviors that they need to execute every single day to systematically, progressively, and incrementally inch closer to the goal. And the goal just ends up being the byproduct. So those three things, and the reason I get so passionate, as I'm sure you can feel, is those are three things that any of us can use as our own operating system in any area of life. No matter how old you are, no matter what industry you're in, you can adopt those three things and start to apply them, and you will see your performance and contribution increase significantly.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to dive into something that that was mentioned in your bio, and I was intrigued by it because it's a topic that, it's not discussed that much, but the topic of changing behaviors within your organization. In my opinion, you can give your insights on this too, but behaviors are kind of driven by the beliefs of the people in the organization, and those behaviors kind of drive the overall culture. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, very fair to say. And ultimately, a team that performs well is one that their beliefs and their behaviors are in lockstep. They're in alignment. Like our beliefs, this is what we preach, this is what we talk about, this is what we have on our website, this is what we put on our t-shirts. Well, that's half of it. And most people have that half. The other half is, do the people do what it says on the t-shirt, on the website, and what you talk about? And if the answer is yes, beliefs and behaviors are in full alignment, those are the teams with the highest level of organizational performance. If the teams just talk about it, but they don't act that way and they don't behave that way, those are the ones that don't. So ultimately, it's about getting crystal clear on what you believe and then making sure you have a system of accountability in place where as many people as consistently as possible are living those things out.
Yep. So maybe I'm a leader that notices that some of my employees need some guidance to change their behaviors, or that the current behaviors maybe don't reflect the overall goals of the organization. Where should I start if I want to address that issue?
Beautiful. I'm glad we're going in this direction. Well, there's a few thoughts. One, on some level, and I mean this on occasion, I mean this literally. Other times, this is more of kind of a metaphorical approach. But really, a leader should have this conversation with every member of the team. The first question is, do you give me permission to lead you? And you can substitute the word lead with anything else. I used to literally, with every athlete I'd work with, I would say, do you give me permission to coach you? And 99.9 times out of 100, they're going to nod and smile the way that you just did. You're going to get compliance. If for any reason someone says, no, I don't give you permission to lead me, they simply cannot be a part of your team or be a part of your organization. Like they have to see the exit immediately. The next question is, do you give me permission to do everything in my power to push you to be the best that you're capable of? Once again, you can change those moving parts. Do you give me permission to coach you to the best of your ability? Do you give me permission to give you feedback? Do you get, whatever would work so that you can make a maximum contribution to the team? Something along those lines. Then the next question is, do you give me permission to hold you accountable? Now, I got to make a sidebar for that, because before you can hold someone accountable, you have to be crystal clear on what you're holding them accountable to. So you also need to make sure that the members of your team are crystal clear. Don't make any assumptions, but make sure they are crystal clear on your organization's vision, on your mission, on your core values, on your standards, on their specific role. Like, once again, don't just assume that they know that. You've got to be crystal clear. This is our mission and vision. This is why we exist as an organization. These are our core values. This is the stuff that we believe, and there is an expectation that you will behave in accordance with these core values. Here are our standards of excellence. This is what winning looks like to us. This is the way we operate. This is what we do on a daily basis. This is your role. This is where you fit into the bigger picture. This is exactly what we need from you every single day to play your position to the best of your ability. Once all of that is crystal clear and you make sure that they understand it, then you ask, do you give me permission to hold you accountable to all of these things? That if I see you saying or doing something that is not in alignment with our core values, you give me permission to hold you accountable. If I see you submitting work that is below the standard of excellence that we expect here, do you give me permission to hold you accountable? And once again, we're not just looking for compliance. I mean, we're looking for excitement and buy-in and believe in. Yes, Alan, absolutely. I'm crystal clear on everything that you need from me, everything that we're trying to do. And if I do anything less than that, I want you to hold me accountable. High performers crave having people in their life that hold them to high standards of excellence because they know that's how they get better. High performers want people to tell them the things they need to hear, not just the things that they want to hear. And then last question, and I'm trying to make sure that this is all in perfect alignment, is you should have the respect to ask them, well, what's the most effective way for me to hold you accountable? If I see you make a turnover or step out of bounds, what's the best way for me to let you know that? Is it a private meeting? Is it a quick email? Can I call you out in front of the rest of the team during a team meeting? I think giving someone the respect of asking their preference is really important. And then once you've put all of that into place, now every single thing that someone on your team says or does can conveniently be put in one of two buckets. It's binary by preference. And that is, it's either something you accept or it's something you need to correct. If it's something you accept, if the member of your team is doing work that is in perfect alignment with your core values, it's meeting your standards of expectations and standards of excellence, then you want to praise that behavior. You want to acknowledge it and praise it because that which gets praised gets repeated. If someone on your team, and of course this will happen because we're dealing with human beings who are flawed and fallible, just like you and I are, if and when someone on your team steps out of bounds or says or does something that is not in alignment with everything we just mentioned, then you have to care enough about them to hold them accountable and to coach them up. And how you do that depends on the individual. This is why, as a leader, one of the most important tools in your toolbox is your emotional intelligence and your ability to communicate. Because the way that I would speak to you or hold you accountable might be different than the way I would hold someone else on the team accountable. I'm going to hold you both to the same standard of excellence. I'm not going to let one person slide and one person get away with it. No, but the way that I do it may be differently. I don't believe that as a coach of a basketball team, you should coach every single kid on your team the same. I don't believe that. I believe you should treat every kid on your team with respect and civility. You should love and care about them, and you should do everything in your power to pour into them, and you should treat them all fairly, but you don't treat them equally and you don't treat them the same. And same thing in business. If someone on your team needs more time and needs more mentorship, then you give it to them. If you have a veteran member of your team that doesn't quite need that, well, that's okay too. Maybe they have some more autonomy. So once again, I know that was a very long-winded answer, but that's really where leaders need to start. And if you can get that part right when you're small, when you have a 10-person startup, and then you can keep that framework in place as you continue to scale, that's how you grow really remarkable large organizations. Large organizations that have hundreds, thousands, and sometimes tens of thousands of team members never lose that basic framework and building block that I just shared.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. I pulled a few things from there. I mean, bottom line is get to know your people, but also by asking those questions that you mentioned, it gives them ownership in their development by them answering it and answering honestly. And once they do answer that, once they're on board, all those hard conversations are easier,
Yes.
and that's that's pretty profound. I need to write those down for sure after we record this. Good stuff.
Absolutely. Well, I love what you just shared. What you're doing is you actually make tough conversations easier by doing the heavy lifting in advance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about this. If you let's just say, for example, that being on time for team meetings and team functions is one of our standards. And one of our core beliefs and core values is being respectful. And we believe that one of the ways we show people we respect them is by valuing their time. It's by being on time. And if you're crystal clear on that, and I see you nodding your head, and I've asked you if I can hold you accountable to that, then if you walk into one of our Monday morning meetings 3 minutes late, there's really not much you can say. I mean, you're welcome to offer a reason for why you're 3 minutes late, but you know that you violated one of our core beliefs and core standards. And, and I'm not saying that that's a big deal. That is something that we'll address afterwards. But the tough conversation has already been had. There's no argument. Now, again, you may choose to share why. You might want to rationalize why you were 3 minutes late. But at the end of the day, we've already talked about the importance of being on time, being respectful, and you already know that it is my job and you have given me permission to hold you accountable. And so we've done most of the heavy lifting in advance. And I think as leaders, that's what we should always be striving to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as black and white as you can get, the better. No gray areas. Yeah, that's good. So how do you ensure that the behavior changes are aligned with the organization's goals and vision?
Well, you go back to square one of what I was just sharing. I mean, it always starts with clarity. If we're ambiguous in any way, then we'll get ambiguous behavior, we'll get ambiguous results. So we have to make sure that we are crystal clear. And as you can see, I don't know if folks are just listening audioly or if they're also, watching visually. I have a sign above my head that says Success Simplified, because that's kind of my mantra and my operating system. From an organizational and team standpoint, complexity undermines execution. And the name of the game in sports and business is execution. It has nothing to do with the teams with the best plans or the teams that talk about it. It's the teams that actually execute when it counts are the ones that win. So I believe as leaders, we should be trying to simplify success. Let's make sure our vision and our mission is crystal clear and as succinct as possible. Let's limit our core values to a handful that we believe most represent who we are and what we're trying to become. And once again, make sure those are crystal clear. Make sure every member of the team knows exactly what they need to be doing for the team to be successful. Get crystal clear on what does winning look like to us. We're recording this in the throes of March Madness. And, in a game like basketball, which is a finite game, it's already been predetermined that the winner of the game is the team with the most points on the scoreboard when the final buzzer goes off. It is not at all ambiguous. Now you might not like who won, but there's no arguing that the team with the most points is declared the winner. Business, which is an infinite game, is a little more evergreen. It's a little more esoteric. It's not quite as clear. If you brought me 100 CEOs right now and I asked each of them to define what winning looks like in business, I'm sure I would see some similar themes and topics, but I would not get 100 identical answers. It wouldn't be the same as with basketball. I'd get some different metrics and different answers and different beliefs, and that's okay. But it's important for if you are running a business and you are a leader, that everyone on your team knows how you define winning and they know what winning looks like. They know it on the macro level. What does winning look like for our team? But they also know it on the micro level. What does winning look like for me and my contribution to the team? And that depends on what department you're in, your position on that team. Like, what does the team need from you? And they've got to be crystal clear on that. So to me, everything goes back to clarity. Everything goes back to simplification. Everything goes back to the basics and the fundamentals.
Yeah. So, when I'm thinking of vision for my organization, some people, and I'm just thinking like this is kind of a personal scenario, but if I'm a part of an organization that's been doing the same things the same way for a long time, I feel like as a leader that we need to be adaptable. Our vision probably needs to change. How do I do that? And how do I start that process? And what challenges might I face with doing that?
Well, I'm a big believer that people will always have more buy-in and believe in and give you a better effort and have a better attitude when they feel like they're co-creating the mission and the vision, when they feel like they have a seat at the table, when they feel like they have a voice. Once again, this is easier if you have a 10-person organization, a little harder when you have a 10,000-person organization. But if you're the leader and you feel like things are stale or stagnant, that you need a refresh, that you might need to shake things up, I believe in asking the group, asking the team, because every member of that team will be able to provide a different vantage point, depending on how long they've worked there, depending on which department they're in, depending on their role. And they have a different vantage point. As the CEO in this example, you're kind of viewing the team from the proverbial ivory tower. You're kind of looking down at everything And that is a very unique vantage point. But how about the newest intern that sees it from a completely different direction? You've been with the company for 20 years, you're the owner and founder, and this person just walked in 2 months ago. They're going to see things very differently than you do. And that is a great thing. I believe in diversity. And in this context, I'm not just talking about, diversity of race or religion or ethnicity or age. I'm talking about diversity of thought, diversity of perspective. Now, many times those groups I just mentioned inherently will have different thoughts and opinions and perspectives, which is why I do believe in diversity of all kinds for an organization. But I think you should try and reach out to as many people as you can and get their evaluation, get their thoughts. And just the mere exercise of asking will show them that you care. It will show them that you value their opinion and their perspective, which again gets people to lean in and buy in. Now, this, as I said, becomes exponentially harder. If you are leading an organization with 10,000 people, you can't necessarily take 10,000 votes. You certainly can't have 10,000 one-on-one conversations. So maybe you pick one or two trusted people from each department and you get 15 to 20 people to share openly and honestly. And hopefully, as a leader, you have created a culture, a safe environment where people feel included, people feel protected, they feel safe to share their honest thoughts, even if what they're going to share is completely splintered from what you've been doing or from what you believe. And if you're a leader with an open mind and an open heart and you're willing to listen, I think that's always going to be the first step to trying to course correct.
Yeah. I had a guest on yesterday that was talking about General Patton and his approach to leadership. And he would always get what he called ground truth. And so if he was getting told things by his officers, he wouldn't take that as gold. He would go out to the battlefield, talk to the troops that were on the ground. And I thought that was a very good phrase to use. And that can apply to decision making, culture stuff, anything like that. But getting your stakeholders involved and getting the ground truth is always a good thing for leaders to do. So I thought that was really good.
Well, especially because they're the ones that are going to be doing the work.
Yep.
If I have an organization where I've got different truck drivers and I'm going to make a change to the protocol that the truck drivers will have to follow, but I don't actually drive a truck either presently, or maybe I don't drive one anymore, then for me to make changes to their day-to-day without consulting them shows the exact opposite of what I just shared a moment ago. It shows them that you don't care, that you're not listening, and that this is my way or the highway. I'm going to tell you guys what's good for you. And if you want to maximize buy-in and believe in, you will always make sure that folks feel like their voice is heard and they have a seat at the table. Now, ultimately, as the leader, as the owner, as the executive or CEO, if there's some dissension or some varying opinions, like ultimately you have to make the decision. I just don't think you should ever make the decision without asking people first.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So speaking, making the vision relative and adaptable, the business environment is constantly changing, whether it's new technology or, staffing changes, things like that. How do you ensure that your vision remains constant and relevant and you are able to adapt within that vision? How do you do that in an organization, big or small?
Well, I'm a believer that your mission, your vision, your core values, your standards, like those are the pillars. That's the foundation. That stuff really should not change. Now, if you have an example of a company that was started in 1850 and has been around for a couple hundred years, yeah, maybe there's some evolution there. But generally speaking, you don't want to be the type of organization that is changing the target that you've been aiming at every year based on trends. Now, the way your team shows up, the things you use as resources, like technology, as you mentioned, which technology is always changing. I think we have to be, as you said, reflective and adaptive enough to be able to make those types of pivots when needed. Pandemic is a perfect example. Nobody saw that coming. And when it did hit, the groups that were able to adjust and pivot the quickest and most responsibly were the ones that were able to flourish during that time. And the ones that weren't really struggled. And I know the pandemic had a lot to do with what industries were successful and what industries struggled. But generally speaking, Your pillars should be as firm as can be. And then everything else, you should be rather loose. Like you don't want to be white knuckling and gripping too tightly on everything else. Everything else should be, let's continue to do what's working well, and let's constantly tinker with whatever's not working well. Let's always take a look under the hood and see which of our standards and practices, which things are continuing to serve us and moving us towards that goal or that mission or that North Star, and what things can we continually improve on. So it's simultaneously being very resolute and firm and convicted in what you believe, but still staying open-minded and flexible enough to change when needed. AI is another example. Regardless of your industry, if you're going to just put your fingers in your ear and hold your breath and say, I'm not going to adopt with AI, you're probably going to get left behind. Your business is most likely going to struggle at some point. Whereas if you lean into that and say, hey, this isn't something I know a lot about right now, but I see this is the way the world is moving, I need to at least familiarize myself and talk with those that know to have a better understanding of how maybe this is something we can use, that maybe our competitors are using it, and it doesn't mean that every business, in the world needs to adopt AI. But I think as a leader, it's your job to stay open-minded and to stay aware of things that are changing and different trends, and then figuring out how and when those apply to your specific industry and your specific organization.
Yeah. Talk about the importance of the communication aspect of your vision, your pillars, your core values, things like that. And, if you have any kind of strategies, boots on the ground stuff about communicating that on a regular basis and really getting employees to buy in and stakeholders to buy in from a leadership perspective.
Well, I'm a big believer. If something's important, you talk about it every day, and you live it every single day. I'm also a believer, and this is something I tell my 3 children all of the time, and that is repetition is not punishment. Repetition is the oldest and most effective form of learning and skill acquisition on the planet, and that's never going to change. So if something is important, you need to make sure you get in repetition after repetition after repetition. And the reason I say that, is as redundant as it may sound, every time your organization gets together, whether it's just a few people for lunch or it's an actual formal meeting or it's an annual conference where they bring in speakers like myself, you should be re-emphasizing and reinforcing and talking about your mission and your vision and what does winning look like. You should be talking about your core values all of the time. The best sports organizations, and I've had a chance to speak with UConn men's basketball team and Alabama's men's basketball team and Penn State's football team. You walk into their training centers and their locker rooms, their core values are written on the wall in every single room, in the weight room, in the gym, of course, in the locker room, in the film room. Like it is, and it's something they talk about all the time. And maybe you have a staff meeting, and the staff meeting always begins by you're going to call on one person and ask them, what does winning look like to us? And have them be ready to share. Or what is our mission or vision? Or maybe every time you get a group together, hey, I'm going to call on 4 people and I want each of you to share one of our core values. But more importantly, I want you to share an example of how one of your teammates lived those core values this week. Let people know this is something you're going to constantly ask about and constantly talk about. And you do that enough times, and it is always top of mind. It is always something they're thinking about. It is always something that they're invested in. So yeah, I'm a big believer in repetition, repetition, repetition.
Yeah. So you mentioned talking to those, high performing teams. When you think about what winning looks like to each one of those, do you notice any similarities? And, I'm sure there's some similarities, but talk about the maybe differences a little bit and the similarities to what winning looks like to each one of those programs.
Well, the primary similarity is that on these teams, every member of the team has decided to trade some of the me for the we.
Mm-hmm.
They understand that they've chosen voluntarily to be a part of something bigger than themselves, and that it's not just about them. Now, as human beings, we are inherently selfish creatures, and there's nothing wrong with a basketball player wanting more playing time or wanting to get more shots or wanting to get his name, on ESPN. There's nothing bad with wanting that. In fact, I think that's actually a high motivator and a high driver. But if their wants and needs exceed or step on or erode or undermine what the team needs them to do, then we have a problem. There's nothing wrong with the backup point guard wanting to be the starting point guard, coming in early and staying late to earn the right to be the starting point guard. There's nothing. In fact, that is highly encouraged. But they need to accept, embrace, and star in their role as the backup point guard at present. You need to star in the role you have while you work for the role that you want. So the one thing that is similar across all high-performing organizations is folks understand that this is a we game. It's not a me game. And any of the me's that I have, I need to make sure they're in full lockstep and alignment with what the team is trying to accomplish. Now, with that said, the differences often come down to personality. I mean, I'm really good friends with a couple dozen Division I basketball coaches, several of which thankfully are still alive during the Sweet 16, which is when we were recording this. And, each of them, they certainly have some pillars and some similarities, but each of them has a different temperament, a different way of doing things, a different style. Some of them are incredibly loud and vocal and use colorful language. Other of them are a little bit more stoic and reserved and choose not to. And yet they're all elite level coaches. So their differences are really masked behind the fact that each of them is self-aware to know how they operate best. Each of them has figured out, this is what works for me when leading people. This is how I can be the most impactful and most influential leader to our group. So they don't try to carbon copy someone else. They don't try to be someone else. They stay very true to who they are. So the fact that they all stay true to who they are is actually a similarity. The way that manifests and the way that they actually behave and act and show up is very, very different based on the individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. So once you have a clear vision for your organization, maybe we've went through this change, been doing things the same way a long time, but we're going to be adaptable. We've figured it out. How can we align our goals now and our initiatives with that vision to operate more efficiently and cohesively?
Well, this is when you just take a look at the process. So we've already covered, everyone is crystal clear on the mission. Everyone is crystal clear on the vision. Everyone understands their role. Everyone knows they're going to be held accountable. Everyone knows the core values. Like all of that is clear. Now we're going to actually tweak the dial and we're going to have a very specific goal that we're trying to achieve. Hypothetically, our business is trying to hit the $100 million revenue mark in 2024. That would be a 20% increase on what we did last year. That is our goal. So everyone is crystal clear. The center of that bullseye is the $100 million revenue mark. Now, as a leader, I've got to be able to deconstruct that and unpack that and break that down so that everybody, each department, each member of the team knows what they need to do to systematically, incrementally, and progressively inch us towards that goal. And lots of times it comes down to math, all right, so that's our goal. Well, let's break that down per quarter. All right. So divide that goal by 4. We need to do $25 million each quarter. All right. Well, let's focus on that smaller piece of the pie. Well, a quarter has got 3 months in it. So how much do we need to do for each month? A little over $8 million. All right. Well, there's 4 weeks in a month. So we need to do about $2 million per week. All right. Now we've got kind of the math laid out. If my math was correct, you might need to fact check that later. We need to do $2 million per week. All right. Now, what do the sales folks need to do? What does the admin staff need to do? What does research and development need to do? What does manufacturing need to do? What does shipping need to do? In each of those different departments, what do they need to do to support doing $2 million in revenue per week? And then each member of each of those departments needs to be very specific in their role. If I'm on I'm on the sales side, what exactly do you need from me? Well, depending on what it is that you're selling, you probably have to figure out, well, how many prospects do I need to talk to in order to get, depending on my conversion rate, how many prospects do I need to talk to at that conversion rate, yield enough sales for my portion of the $2 million a week? And then it's my job to be, smiling and dialing and on the phone trying to get, so it's literally just breaking it down to the moving parts. And that way, everyone should be able to wake up every single day with a crystallized game plan of this is what the team needs from me today to do my part to make a contribution so that we can inch closer to that. And then ultimately, if you've broken that down correctly and your math is correct and everyone's roles are assigned and correct, and every member of that team shows up every day committed to doing their part, then it's not a matter of if you'll hit your goal. It's more of a matter of when.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as you can see with any moving parts, one of those departments might not be performing at a high level. A couple members of a certain department might not be performing. And the more holes in the boat you have, then the less likely it is that you're going to reach your goal.
Yeah, that's good. Very good. It's all about the process. We focus way too much on outcomes and, targets that we hit, things like that. But man, that process is so important to developing and hitting those goals at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, let me leave you with this one thought. I understand how important goals are. And I would never say goals aren't important, that winning's not important. I'd certainly never tell a business that being profitable is not important. But here's the thing. I've learned that when you focus on the process and you focus on everything that I just shared, you actually increase the chance that you're going to hit the goal. You increase the chance you're going to get what it is that you want. You increase the chance of winning. I mean, just look at the game of basketball. Look at all of the process parts of basketball. Well, on offense, at its most basic level, it's to take the highest percentage shot possible every time your team has the ball. On defense, it's to force your opponent to take the lowest percentage shot possible every time they have the ball. Now, underneath that, so how do you get the highest percentage shot on offense? Well, you move the ball, you make extra passes, you cut hard to the basket, you set solid screens. You pass the ball to open teammates who are in range of their there's a bunch of process steps. And if you do those things, I can guarantee you that if you tend to take the highest percentage shot every time down the floor on offense, and your opponent tends to take the lowest percentage shot every time when you're on defense, you will win the overwhelming majority of your games. Like the scoreboard will take care of itself. Same thing in business. If research and development, if sales, if manufacturing, if shipping, if logistics, if each of those groups does what they're supposed to do, and each member of those departments does what they're supposed to do, and you've set appropriate revenue goals, the scoreboard will take care of itself.
Yep. Last question here.
Sure.
At the end of the day, what do you want to be remembered by? Alan Stein Jr., how do you want people to remember you, and what legacy do you want to leave?
I mean, at the base level, I certainly want to be known as a good father, someone that loved and cared for his 3 children, someone who just cared in general about life. I mean, and I do. I care about how I show up. I care about others. I care about doing a good job. I care about my craft. I care about my health. Caring can be a superpower for people, and caring is always a choice. So I think the things that, one of the things that can undermine your ability is indifference, is apathy, is just simply not caring. Now, with that said, there is a long list of things that I don't care about, that I am completely indifferent on. But when it comes to being a father, when it comes to being a speaker, when it comes to being an author, when it comes to being a podcast guest, I absolutely care about doing the best job that I'm capable of as consistently as possible.
Yep, that's good. Well, Alan, thank you for joining me today. This has been great conversation, great insight. I hope my listeners can grab some pieces and apply it to their situations. And I look forward to following you and what you do in the future. And anyway, thanks for joining me today.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Lead to Win podcast. If you're listening this week, make sure to drop a rating on whatever app you're listening on. I'd love to hear from listeners and make this podcast even more relevant to you. Also, make sure to follow the Lead to Win podcast on social media. We're on Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Give us a follow and feel free to share the content. Again, thanks for listening this week. I'm your host, Bo Bergen. See you next Tuesday.